and welcome to Beverly Arts Talk. Today I have a special podcast on the play Porch Society with writer Melda Beaty and director Delia Gray. Thank you, Melda and Delia, for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes.
So first thing, I read the script and wow, what an amazing, rich set of characters you have in this play. I was really moved by these women who all share their personal stories on a historic election night, November 4th, 2008 in Marks, Mississippi, but also an anniversary of the main character, Carrie Honey's son Ricky's death like 41 years ago. So before I go on too much about it, can you tell us a little bit about the story and your characters and what the setting of Obama's election night means in the context of the story?
Sure. Yes. So the story essentially is the story about a mother's grief, injustice, and hope. And the backdrop is President Obama's historical election, being the first Black president of the United States of America, and what that means to this mother who lost her son 41 years to this date. So, the setting, Marks, Mississippi, that's my father's hometown. And so I wanted to find probably one of the most rural places in the United States, just to get their perspective on the election. And also the perspective of older generation. So these women who are all over 70, well over 70, have stories and wisdoms and perseverance and trials and good times and bad times. And they come to this safe space, this front porch, to share, to support each other, to love each other, and to, in the end, celebrate each other.
So, Marks, Mississippi, you chose that because it was you said your father's town that he grew up in?
Yes.
And you must have spent some time there as well, or?
Honestly, I did not. So it's interesting because my mother is from Jackson, Mississippi. So almost every year until I was maybe about 10 or 11, we would go back to Mississippi, to Jackson. And I only remember maybe 2 times going to Marks, Mississippi. And so when we would go, I went once and I met my grandfather for the first time and his sister. And then we went the second time when my grandfather passed away. So all I remember are happy and sad times. And I just remember how almost desolate the place seemed. I remember driving past cotton fields. I remember the water tastes like well water. I just remember those things. I remember my aunt's home was kind of a shotgun house, things I never experienced or seen in my life. And so I remember asking my dad, what did you do here when you were a kid? Because I'm in the city, there's plenty to do. But, that's what they knew. And so I think I became fascinated with that small town rural living. But I will say this, I remember at the funeral, everyone knew everyone. They knew my grandfather, they knew his kids. Even in that small town, there was community. So all of those memories kind of found their way into Front Porch Society.
And that's not an unusual thing for a young African-American girl or boy to go back to the South to visit grandparents or great-grandparents, aunts and uncles. My family was from Tennessee, from another small little town. So the stories are very similar. But what is really unique about Front Porch Society is that it takes place in Marks, Mississippi. But Marks, Mississippi was also the starting point for the People's March in 1968, I believe. Eight. Mm-hmm. And the mule train. Yes. That was Martin Luther King's vision of protesting against all of the injustice and the economic substandard living conditions, etc., of not only African Americans but whites and Indians as well. And there are references in the play that allude to the mule train, and these women having taken a part
Right.
in that. So not you know, I love the fact that this is a cast of older women and how they have lived their lives and how they are living their life in 2008.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the characters and some of the themes. I feel like Obama's theme of hope and change is very present, and in the enthusiasm of some of your characters, and notably Sister Stallsworth and Alberta. But your main protagonist, Carrie Honey, is sort of more. She's a little more bitter and cynical. And doesn't seem as interested in the hope and change of Obama that her community is feeling in that moment. But we find out at one point that her bitterness seems to have been present long before her son's death, even. And when I was reading it, I wondered where do you think that cynicism and bitterness comes from? Why don't we see that as much in the other characters?
Delia, I'm going to have you start, just from a different perspective before I say as the writer.
Okay. Let me say that Carrie found herself pregnant before some of these other ladies, just a younger woman who was pregnant. I think there's a bit of perhaps feeling she might have missed out on some things, and life just it didn't work out the way that perhaps she might have wanted it to. And so there's a little bit of bitterness there. And then, of course, with the death of her son, that just deepened that bitterness even more. The other characters, they lived their lives. They made the best out of what they were given. One character, Alberta in particular, she to me is the most adventuresome one of the group. She gets out, and in fact, she talks about going to Chicago and going to see the Obama home and taking pictures of the home. And so, you know, there's Carrie looking at that and wondering, well, what if I had gone out? What if I ventured to Chicago or somewhere else? But her perspective on life just didn't allow her to do that.
Yeah, and I like to hear what other people who are, have read the play and seen it think. And I totally agree with Delia. A lot of the main character, Carrie Honey, is based on an actual relative. My mother was raised by a great aunt who happened to be named Carrie. Very bitter woman. Sweet as pie to me, but she was almost to the point of abusive with it. And she had a lot of anger within her that stemmed from how she was raised, from her opportunities in life. So I think Delia is absolutely right. When I envisioned Carrie, I envisioned this woman who, for whatever reason, is broken in her own way. Life did not work out the way she would have hoped. And when Alberta comes back with all her enthusiasm and all her stories of partying up in Chicago and living there and everything, it's almost, it's almost a jealousy, but just maybe a wish that could have been her life. Yet, she's been in March, she's made the most of it, and then her son dies. So it's a culmination of all of that sends her down this kind of rabbit hole of grief and despair. Now, Alberta, like she said, is kind of her nemesis in that she is this hopeful. So you have this hope against this grief. She is everything that could be, and that she wants Carrie to believe in and get out of this bitterness in this small world, this front porch society, if you will, and expand your mind. And Carrie's resistant to it.
Yeah, and that's that comes through their sort of love-hate relationship that they have. and but there was when I was reading it, I try not to give too much away of your play. I hope I'm not giving any spoiler. I don't know if I am, let me know. I'll cut it out. But
Okay.
but there's a scene later on where it almost seemed like Alberto was saying, telling Carrie, why do you always blame everybody? And there's a little bit of victim blaming in a way. And I wondered why does Alberto do that with her old best friend? Does she feel kind of guilty maybe for having left town during a hard time for Carrie? Do you think she hurts to see her old best friend hurt, so she naturally is kind of defensive and tries to blame Carrie for that, as a way to kind of project those feelings? What do you think on that?
Well, I'll comment. I think Alberta, as I said before, is just a little more adventuresome than the others. And she's less tolerant about Carrie's behavior.
Yeah.
She makes a comment that ever since we were little girls, you blame somebody for something else, and it's at the point where she just says, "Get over it."
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Try something else. You keep doing the same thing over and over, you're gonna get the same results. It's so clear in her mind.
Right, exactly. I think it's just a matter of she's tired of it. This is a new day in Alberta's mind. We have a chance to make history. Get with it. Why aren't you excited? We can't do anything about the past. Move on. And it's not that easy for Carrie. And I think that's where they clash.
Right. Let's talk about some of the other characters. You have such interesting characters throughout all of the women have their own characteristics that are very interesting and compelling to read and I'm sure to see on stage. So I'd like to talk about Ms. Martha a little bit. The character Ms. Martha is really sort of a beacon in the story. Oldest woman in town,
yes.
right?
95.
95, yeah. And you could almost have made an entire story made from her life, it seems. She seemed to have lived a very full life, but also in a hard way. She's had some abuse from her husband. That comes in later. But she's a strong woman, and she clearly has a great will to live, and she shows that in her character. I also kind of love how she keeps confusing the Jesse Jackson from 3rd Street, Reverend Jesse
Miss
Jackson.
Jackson's oldest boy on 3rd Street.
It was really a funny piece of writing there. But where does this character come from, Ms. Martha, and what's the inspiration for her?
It's actually pronounced Martha, Miss Martha. Yes,
Martha.
Yes, Miss Martha. Okay. She is my favorite character. I had the most fun writing her. And again, she comes from that Southern tradition, older women and the respect that you have for them. And again, I have to go back to the visits to Mississippi every year when I would visit and I would be with my great aunt, Carrie. She would walk me around and she was so proud because my mom had gone off to college and gone to Chicago and this is her little girl. And she would take me around and she would introduce me to the residents in Jackson. And there was a Miss Martha who lived on her block. She was an older woman. I remember her hair was white as snow. I'll never forget that. And I was kind of afraid, because I think I was maybe 8 or 9. I was kind of afraid to approach her. My aunt was kind of pushing me. Yeah, this is Joanne's daughter. They're up in Chicago. And I just remember talking to her and I asked her, I said, why is your hair so white? And she said, you just keep on living. And that is kind of how Miss Martha, the character, is. She has lived and she's experienced some tragedies and some good things. She taught school. She had husbands. She's lived. And so I was inspired by Miss Martha, the actual Miss Martha, and just, again, that older generation in the South and the wisdom that they impart.
One moment of poignancy in the beginning is that really struck me is when Towner, who was Ricky's best friend growing up, talks about how Ricky, a black boy growing up in Marks, Mississippi in 1967, told his class growing up that he wanted to be president of the United States, and everyone around him laughs. But Towner is the only one that believes him and kind of believes that, this is something that could have happened, and you get a sense that Towner and maybe even the Black community sees this election as real progress. That it could have been Ricky that was running, and Barack Obama's vindication of that in that moment.
Yes.
But now, kind of fast forward to this moment we're in now, and just to get away a little bit from your story and from the play, but now, of course, given where we are now as a nation with higher racial tensions and Donald Trump as president, I wonder, was Carrie right to be cynical that we would be in a post-racial America?
Well, she's probably, if it were today, she'd probably say, "I told you so." It wasn't going to work out.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're right about that. She would say, white people, actually, Winnie's the one who says it, white people do whatever they want to do. And I think that sentiment would still be Carrie's in a sense. Nothing's changed. Nothing changed in 1967, and it hasn't changed in 2020. That, I think, would be Carrie's point of view.
What do you think the other character's point of view would be?
Alberta would certainly be the one out there. Vote! Get out there and vote! Fill out your census 2022.
Absolutely. Yeah, she would, definitely. And I think if Miss Martha could, she'd be out there with her too.
Right.
And Sister Stallworth. Sister Stallworth is she represents faith and belief in a higher, something better or higher than yourself, and not losing your faith. And so she would probably also be championing, the rights and protesting in her own way.
There's a lot of discussions over the election in the play, and one that's particularly interesting to me that I wanted to bring up was when the mailman Towner says that white folks rather see a Black woman before a Black man, and I wondered if you believe that to be true, or if you just sort of that into this character's feelings, or is he speaking of a feeling that's with the community overall of that moment in 2008? In the Barack Obama moment?
Well, my thought process was that there's something about Black men that does bring out the fear in folks, as Towner puts it, because, and again, that's just a lot of years of ingrained perceptions and stereotypes. So I think in this moment in which we live, it's not just Black men, it's Black women as well. It's Hispanic people. It's, whatever is other seems to be objectified these days. So I think when Towner was making that comment, it was just, and then I also too wanted to talk about some of the history of voting exactly, or elections, and not forget Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to run for president as well. So it wasn't to make a statement about today as much as it was to make a statement about the era of the play.
I think part of your question is, does the Black community possibly think that Black women are less feared than Black men? Mm-hmm. And I personally, I can only say personally, I think that is true. And you can look at what everyone has now learned, that our mothers and fathers have had to have talks with our Black boys about driving and how to behave behind a car if they're pulled over. And that's an example of that kind of, but they're going to see a Black boy driving and think something else, or a Black boy running down the street.
Right.
As opposed to a Black girl running down the street. So yes, I think that fear is there.
And in the story, it's there.
Yes.
And there's without giving too much away, I mean, there are moments of police brutality in the story, and one that happens to the son, to a Black boy, a Black teenager.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's another part in the play where Carrie says to Terrence, the young high school boy, well, no, she says it to Sister Stallworth, I think, now, about Terrence. Well, we can't keep um,
Ah,
shielding information from him.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, we've got to be honest.
right,
And he has to know what life is really like
right,
and about.
right.
Um, and I've had this conversation with Melda before. You know, is that shielding our children, be they white or black or Hispanic, Asian, shielding our children, trying to show them good and this is the way to do this and this is the way to do that and don't and not discuss some of our weaknesses and frailties as human beings. Is that to their advantage or not? You know, because at some point that child is going to get out into society and be hit with something that they're unfamiliar with.
Right, right.
So there are a lot of things in Front Porch Society that are in there. I don't know if Melda put them in there on purpose, but that you can pick out and look at and really give thought to.
Yeah, and Melda, you do it with such a you know, it's a very dramatic story, but there's also you insert humor in like the perfect moments, you know,
Thank you.
where you're also talking, you know, you're talking about real issues, but there's like the character of Winnie, you know, the rumor mill character.
Yes.
You know, she's hearing,
Winnie.
Because
There's a Winnie on every block.
I was going to say, who doesn't know a Winnie? And especially when it comes to the election of a Black president, all the rumors were abound. And she holds on to them. You know, for her, that's conversation, you know. So,
yeah. You know, and they're not small rumors. It's in the story.
No.
It's, you know, but I'm sure these may have been real fears. Bombs going off, the Klan, you know, being around the polls, and you know that's those were sentiments,
Yeah.
right? Sure.
And the real, and I think the one that many people thought was, I hope they don't kill him. I had heard that. And so, you know, it's this fear that if he reaches this status, he could become a target, you know. So for Winnie to say that, you know, or even Miss Martha also says it too. It was real. That was some of the sentiments that people had and fear for him.
Absolutely. There are other themes that I want to talk about. You know, there's themes of motherhood throughout the sisterhood. I mean, grief is a huge theme, and they kind of weave into each other. But there is a real love, I feel like, that comes from the characters for each other, even though they disagree, even though some of them have a harder edge. But there's the theme of grief. I want to talk about that for a second, because there a lot of these characters have experienced grief together. Can you two speak to that, and what kind of brought you to the story, or I should say, what brought you to the issue of grief to talk, you know, to have that as a theme in your story here?
Well, two characters in particular have experienced grief that we know of and we learn about. It was I guess it was to have this juxtaposition of hope against something, and so hope and despair, you know, for the storyline. That probably is where I was going with it. And also around the time that President Obama was elected, there was an actual scandal at the cemetery where Emmett Till lays to rest. And so those two stories kind of melded into my thinking. And, you know, Emmett Till, one of the greatest tragedies of life, 14, murdered, you know. And so that idea of grief and against this backdrop of hope. And so that's how it kind of comes to be in Front Porch Society.
And then all of the female characters, Miss Martha and Miss Stallworth, have long time been friends of Carrie's, in the sense that they come and they sit on that porch, and they're really, even though they enjoy the day sitting with her, they're there because they know her grief.
Yes.
And they're there to support her and hold her hand, if you will, even though it's been 40 years, you know.
Yeah.
Even though Miss Stallworth is new in town and she's only been there 10 years. But Miss Martha, for sure, is there for the long haul.
Yeah.
So it is a story of compassion and empathy, sisterhood.
Yeah. And those themes all come through. They really do. And I'd love to talk about the ending, but I will save that part for the audiences.
Yes. Don't give it away.
I don't want to give it away. It's great. One other theme I see in there is sort of a total mistrust of the government coming from Carrie, and movements in politics. Again, playing into her theme of cynicism. She also has an absolute mistrust of the police. And there's a moment, and again, I hope I'm not giving too much away, but where you wrote in, he's screaming for mama, and that really struck me, because we've all heard the George Floyd video where he cries out for his mama, cries out in his horrific murder by the hands of a police officer. And you wrote this before that moment. So,
absolutely.
Is this police brutality that you've seen or experienced personally, or were you just kind of writing about a feeling of mistrust that's evident in the Black community?
Yeah, I have not experienced it personally, but when it happens in my community, it's personal. And I remember after George Floyd's death, I was watching television or something on Facebook, and there was a woman holding a sign and said, when George Floyd cried mama, he was calling all of us mothers. And so it's just something about that, almost that guttural scream of calling for your mother. And that just connotates so much, everything that's wrong when someone has to call in that way as a cry for help. It just really centers the idea that there had been an injustice done to not only this young man, but to the whole community at that time. Again, this was 1967. So I had no way of knowing what was going to happen in 2020, but it had happened in America, and it probably was happening also in 2008 as well.
Where do you think these characters would be right now in this moment?
Well, I think Terrence, which we haven't even talked about, this youthful young man.
The enthusiasm. He's really the hope.
Yeah. He wants to fight for his country. So I don't know. I could see Terrence doing some great things in life. I don't know if my other older ladies would be with us, but maybe. What do you think, Delia?
Oh, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Well, I guess Miss Stallworth would still be standing by her husband and out trying to bring the saints in. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It would be
because they're in their 70s, all
late 70s, right
to project him.
Melda, when you write these characters, are any of them? Are they coming from any part of you as well? You said earlier that they come from other people, maybe other relatives. But what part of this is autobiographical in that sense?
Oh, that's a good question. Who do I relate to? I guess the autobiographical part is just that it's a community of my father. It's a community of women that, even though I wasn't familiar with that community of women in the South, but even here in the North, I've been surrounded by and sat at the feet of a similar community of women, whether it's my mother's, my aunts, grandmother, etc. So I think it's autobiographical in a sense of, listening to them talk when I was younger, and even today, their stories, seeing them gather, just a part of my life that I've witnessed. And really, my grandmother, who's deceased now, her best friend was Miss Honey. And when my grandmother would come to visit her, they sat on Miss Honey's porch. That was just a common place, a common place for them to sit, a common occurrence. And so as a child, I saw that. I witnessed it. I'd stop by and talk to them and sit with them for a while. So I guess if it's anything, it's just those experiences in my life I try to capture to some degree in Front Porch Society. And I've been told when people have watched the play, often what I hear is that's my aunt. I know those women. I grew up there, they start naming them. That's my aunt, such and such and such and such. My, so that's great to hear.
Yeah, very relatable characters and empathetic characters, very empathetic.
Yeah.
Delia, what drew you to want to direct this? And I don't really know the story about how you and Melda know each other. So can you speak to that?
A community of women.
That's right.
That's how we met. It was through a mutual friend. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was another play that Melda had written, and she wanted to do a reading, and so I offered to have it at my home. And so we did that reading, and then we did not talk for years, and then she gave me a call one day, and I was in TJ Maxx, and I said, sure, I'll do it.
Yes, yeah.
But so that's how we met. Now, what was the other part of the question?
Well, I want to know how you got drawn to this particular
to the play.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after I read it, I knew it was something I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I liked the fact that it was a predominantly female cast. And the characters were so real to me. I mean, I knew them. And I liked the fact that it was against the backdrop of something historical. And I liked the way she weaved some history into the play. And I hope people who come to see the play will not enjoy, I want them, yes, to enjoy the play, but to take away from the play some history, some real historical facts, as well as to want to go back and maybe do a little research on the internet about the mule train. What was that? What was that time like? And then maybe go back to some of the videos that might be on YouTube of 2008, that the night of election and the acceptance speech. Melda had shared with me a video about Marks, Mississippi, that moved me so that I wanted to do a prologue, at least for the reading on October 25th, Sunday, when we do the reading. We will begin with a prologue that kind of sets the stage for Marks, Mississippi, not 2008 necessarily, but the people who were there in that town. You see pictures of past historical events and places and people to give you a context for 2008 and where the play begins. So it brought back memories of Tennessee and going to see my grandmother and going to the we used to call it homecoming, wherever the family was living. We had relatives that moved to Detroit as well as some that were in Chicago, but we'd all come for this homecoming to this little small town in Tennessee where you were related to each other.
Right.
and cousins I didn't even know I had, so that's what the play reminded me of, and I wanted to put a Delia Gray touch on it.
Yes, and she has.
Delia, how are you guys doing the virtual reading on the technical side of it? I know it's really a tricky thing to do right now.
Oh my goodness, please don't even begin to ask. This is my first Zoom reading experience. And it's really funny. You don't know what you're doing until you actually get into it. And last night was the first rehearsal. And thank God for Oliver. Yes, he is heaven sent.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Because you worry about, well, can I take the person out? Well, no, the frame has to stay there. If they go out, then you don't know where the frame is going to come back. So you can't really look at each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little disturbing, but we worked around it, we overcame it, and the actors had done their homework. And they were on top of it. They were, let's get this done and let's give it the best we've got. And that's what we're doing.
Delia, can you speak to the casting? How you went about your auditions and found the cast?
Well, the first thing I had them do was to submit photos and a clip of anything. I just wanted to see how they moved and how they spoke, and not necessarily were they, performing. If it was a older character like Miss Martha, I was not looking for an older character or an older person. I was looking for someone who might be able to give something to that older character that would make them authentic. And the second part of the callbacks was for them to actually do some reading from the script, which they did with each other and individually. But I like to see what people can do and see what they can bring to a character in an interesting way. And I look for authenticity.
And Melda's writing makes that probably easier because the dialogue is so rich and it comes right off the page.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's something to notice, that it really the colloquialisms of the area and the time period and all that come through, and it's if I'm not an actor necessarily, but as I'm reading through it, I'm thinking about exactly how an actor might go about that dialogue, and it's just so well written that it seems like you'd just be able to read it right off.
Thank you. Thank you.
To the both of you, I know how I am when I see something I've created and it's performance night, and there's that first night that it's off. What do you guys think you'll be feeling when you're watching it? Melda, when you're writing, it's finally being brought to life, and then Delia, your direction, it's right there, it's live, it's opening night. What are the feelings?
Well, I'm always a little nervous, and my nerves come from how people receive it. Now, From Porch Society has had quite a few productions thus far, so but even with those productions, I'm still nervous. How will they get the jokes? Will they understand? Will it resonate with them? So I'm a little nervous, but I do trust the director. And I've been fortunate to have directors who are very communicative with me and involve me in the process. And I trust their judgment. Delia has chosen a wonderful cast. I mean, when they were auditioning, I just got goosebumps because they really embodied what I envisioned for the character. So, for this reading, what I'm very excited about is what Delia is her vision, what she's kind of put together to bring this experience to everyone. And Beverly Arts Center is allowing us to do an educational talk at the end so that we can kind of leave the audience with some takeaways and then involve the audience in it. So that kind of relaxes my nerves because it's going to be kind of more of an engagement period at the end than just watch and, leave. I believe the talk back is really going to help it resonate with people and stay on their minds and maybe do something about whatever they're feeling. In particular, vote.
Right, and of course we're in the pandemic still, but we haven't really talked about that much in this moment. But it's going to be on the stage at some point,
Yes, so, yes, we believe that.
Yes. One last question: what do you guys think is the importance of sharing this story right now, in this moment, weeks before another high stakes presidential election?
Yeah, like I was saying, just to encourage people to vote. If you were apathetic, hopefully this will inspire you not to be. Just vote and maybe open your minds to some of the issues that are happening in our world. Namely with some of the brutality that's happening as well. And maybe, get involved, however that looks for you. Get involved in making our world different, our nation different than it is, making it for the better. I think that's one of my big takeaways with doing it now.
All right. Thank you, Melda and Delia, so much for coming on Beverly Arts Talk. It's really been a joy talking about Porch Society, which is going to air virtually as a reading on October 25th at 3 p.m. All right. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maddie.
Really great story, and really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.